Thanks everyone for being here today. My name is Suzanne Gosden Kitchen. I'm in the Chambers College in the Management Department. Today we're here to learn more about engaging our learners. We're going to learn a little bit more about identifying some of the challenges to engagement, regardless of the learning environment that we're in. And we're going to discuss ways to promote engagement in the learning space that you occupy this semester. We've got a great group of people for you to learn with today. I'd like to introduce those people to you. We have Sarah Morris from English. We have Robin Hissam from Biomedical Engineering. We have Stephanie Lorenz from Curriculum and Instruction. We have Milena Bernstein from Learning Sciences. And Natalie Zink Corcoran, our Faculty Senate President, is going to keep us all on track by making sure we have documents and that we can communicate with each other during this event. I am really excited to be part of this activity today. We are really going to engage you in this learning process today, and we're going to kick that off with Sarah, who's going to give us a writing into the day activity. Sarah?
Welcome, everyone. Many of us begin our classes with an opportunity to do some reflective writing. So we're going to start that way here. I'm going to give you a prompt and I'll paste it into the chat too. But what we'd like you to do is take a moment and reflect on a time when you were deeply engaged in learning, any kind of learning. It could be in school or out of school. It could be formal or informal, self-directed, mentored, monitored learning, individual or communal. Be as specific as possible. So what we want you to do is really capture how it felt, what you were doing mentally, physically, emotionally, and socially. I'm going to set a timer for about 5 minutes and just ask you to write quietly, and then we'll come back together. So take about 5 minutes and consider these prompts in writing. Take another minute or so and finish up your thinking. All right, that's about 5 minutes to write and reflect. Hold on to this and we'll come back to it a little later in the session.
All right, thank you, Sarah, for leading us through that beginning activity. I'd like us now to turn to Stephanie, who's going to watch a video with us, and we're going to do some dissection of that video. In order to participate in this activity, you do need to engage in looking at some documents in the Google Drive. There is item number 2 is the engagement heuristic. Please make sure that you download that because we're going to be using that. And Stephanie, we're going to let you take it away from here.
Great, thank you. And thanks everybody for joining us. What you're about to see is just a 4 to 5 minute clip of a 3rd grade classroom where students are applying their understandings of even and odd numbers. Now, important to note was originally this class session was supposed to be a review. However, a child in the class comes up and maintains that 6 can be both an even and an odd number. So the teacher pulls back and asks students to revisit the working definitions that they have. So what we'd like for you to do is notice the teacher and the teaching, the learners and the learning, and anything about the environment that you might witness that might speak to you and that might make you wonder. And then we're going to pull back all of these pieces and bring them together and ask you to talk about some of the things that you noticed. And you can go ahead and use the engagement heuristic if you have the documents available, and you would be noting the yellow column, the first column for this piece.
Okay, just give me 1 second. I'm going to give folks just maybe 15 seconds to get 20 seconds to get that. Document 2 in the folder that we shared with you, the engagement heuristic.
If you don't have the document in front of you, that's okay for now. We can just go ahead and utilize just some paper in front of you, and we'll solve that here in a moment. Natalie, we don't have volume. Natalie, there's no volume on the video. Natalie, there's no volume on the video.
trying to figure out the technical difficulties. Apologies, folks. Bear with me. Thank you, Melina. See if this works. It's all the way up here.
Okay. Does everybody understand what he's trying to argue? He's saying 6 could be even or it could be odd.
Because,
Well, watch what he's going to prove, and then you can
because
ask me a
see
question
this,
about it.
there's 2. Number 2 over here. Put that there. Put this here. There's 2, 2, and 2. And that would make 6.
I know, which is easy. I think I know what he's saying.
It's even.
Could you stand here? People have some questions for you.
I think what he is saying is that it's almost, I think what he's saying is that you have 3 groups of 2, and 3 is an odd number, so 6 can be an odd number and be even number.
Do other people agree with that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And do other people agree with him? Do you disagree with that?
Yeah, I disagree with that because it's not according to here, can I show it on? It's not according to how many groups it is. Let's say that I have, let's see. If you call 6 an odd number, why don't we, let's see, 5, 6, 5. Let's say 10. 1, 2. And here are 10 circles. And then you would split them. Let's say I wanted to split them by 2. So 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then why do you not call 10 an odd number and an even number? Or why don't you call other numbers and odd numbers and an even number?
I didn't think of that that way. Thank you for bringing it up. So I say it's 5, 10 can be an odd and an even.
Yeah, but what about other numbers? Like if you keep on going on like that and you say that other numbers are odd even, maybe we'll end it up with all numbers are odd and even. Then it won't make sense that all numbers should be odd and even, because if all numbers were odd and even, we wouldn't be even having this discussion.
Are people following this disagreement? This is an important thing that I didn't even realize we were disagreeing about, so it's important to see if we can try to figure this one out. What are you going to show?
But I didn't really need to show it.
You don't need to show something? What are you trying to say?
I just wanted to say, if you wanted an odd number, you just had to take one off it.
Why would that work?
Because usually odd numbers are
Can you
that it's kind of have ones in the middle, like 5. And there's a 1 in the middle, or 9. I think it are these circles. There's 2 together, there's 2 together. Together, and this 2 together, and just 1 left. And even numbers like 6. You can't get anything in the middle. There isn't 1 left.
So you're saying the even numbers are the ones where you can group them all by 2s, and the odd ones are the ones where you end up with 1 left over?
Yeah, I think I agree.
If 6 is an even number, then how come there's 3 here and there's not one left out?
Because even numbers are things like this. They have even numbers have 2 in them, and also odd numbers have 2 in them, except they have 1 left. Yeah.
Okay, so you actually are suggesting a definition, I think. Let's have everybody hear that one more time. Listen carefully. Proposing a definition for odd numbers. Can we listen to her one more time? Say again one more time what you say the definition is of an odd number.
Well, an odd number is something that has 1 number left over.
After you do what?
After you circle the 2.
Any questions? Are you clear about what she's trying out?
Just always have to have it.
Just a second. Let's make sure people understand what she's suggesting. Who thinks they could come up and try a number on the board using her definition to test to see if it's even or odd? That would be a way of seeing if we understand what she's trying to say.
Okay.
All right. So thanks for sticking with us through there in the beginning. What I want to ask you now is to think about what you noted and think about some things that stuck out to you. You can type, if you would like, in the Q&A things that you're noticing. You could also raise your hand and someone can let you unmute you so that you can speak with us. If somebody would share some of the thoughts and notes that they had. So we have some notes about the students were interested in the discussion. It was difficult to describe teachers' expectations. The teacher did a good job letting the students work through the issue on their own. And I wanna kind of circle on that, Kayla. You mentioned that and you recognize that the students were grappling with something. They had an issue that they were having, and it led them to a disagreement, really, right? And so one of the things that Melina will lead us further in is that issue of authenticity and relevance when we're talking about engaging learners. So that was, I want to just point kind of that out for the work that we're doing wrong. I like how Carol mentioned too in the Q&A that the teacher didn't give children in this specific video a right or wrong answer. So it was really interesting to notice the actions and the intentional choices that the teacher made in not leading students in those directions. So the teacher allowed the students to work through the problem on their own. So the another issue or another theme that we'll hear about from Elena in a few minutes is that idea of autonomy and construction of knowledge. So that was a really good notice that I see from another colleague of ours. The kids are learning from each other. Okay, I love that comment too, Marina, and the way that students were not led by one sole person or one sole person was not considered the instructor in that space. The value of everyone's knowledge and what they brought to the table was being considered. And I also see that several folks had noticed the atmosphere in the space that they're in. Many people who view this video will make that comment about the rapport and the way that all of the learners were speaking with one another. So that speaks to another thing that Melina is going to guide us through is having that comfort level and the obstacles that we can bring down in a classroom to promote stronger engagement with our learners also. Carolyn is mentioning also in the Q&A that the teacher allowed the students to work on their own, bringing about that idea of autonomy. So the structure of the classroom, Teresa is mentioning some things about the structure of the classroom. And so what I think is interesting in that is that it may appear also it doesn't have structure, it may not have classroom management, and it may not have certain things, but sometimes those designs are very intentional. And there's a reason why it may appear to be this, that, or the other. And even though it may have an experience of the student in one hand, the teacher may have an intention otherwise. And I'm excited to see Melina guide us through those next pieces. Sarah was talking about how she loved the teacher allowing the conversation to persist. A lot of times I think that time that we give our students to sit and grapple and think about and reflect on something is just as important as arriving to the answer we may hope that they get to. So that was a great notice. Thank you, Sarah. The students working together. That's another powerful notice. I know in so many situations we talk about collaborative learning and being innovative across disciplines and joining ideas together. And this is another good example of our students using that piece and how engaging it is to share and create together. Because even though this might be a concept we all on this call are familiar with, obviously these students in the classroom are not. So they're constructing and they're developing and they are really grappling with what is the case here? I've got to construct my own definition. And the teacher was helping them with what she specifically called a working definition. So going back through the other Q&A comments, they were actively involved in the argument. However, all of the students were not engaged, and that's a really good thing to mention. What else was going on in the classroom? Because it's easy to often pull ourselves to learners who are engaged and speaking forward, but what does an engaged learner necessarily look like? And what kind of engagement are we thinking about? So those are some other really great components. Thank you for bringing that forward. The children were not frustrated or giving up. That's a really important piece. And we heard that word from Sarah earlier, the persistence. And this video is just a short portion of the class. And so students were really engaged and not wanting to move on from this because they weren't settled in on a deep understanding of what that was. So oh my gosh, these are wonderful. I am seeing some great comments here. We see that the teacher stood back to allow the students to take control of their learning. Again, that autonomy thread is really shining through. I want to call on our panelists too, because for some folks, this was the first time that they got to watch this video in the development of our webinar. So I want to call on Sarah, Robin, and the other folks in our panel. What were some themes that emerged for you guys as you were watching?
So sort of based on what Jessica Haynes had said, the students were respectful. There was one point where he's like, thank you for that opinion. I hadn't thought of it that way. And it was extremely surprising, not only for a third grader to say that, but just to have that sort of comfort level within the classroom was cool.
Yes, yeah, Robin, great point. And I think we all kind of speak to that. And there are so many quotes and phrases out there that say that the best learning comes from someone you trust, with someone you're comfortable with. And that's a big deal when we're talking about engaging learners and that personal aspect. Sarah, any comments from you on that?
So one of the things that I noticed about this video and that I love about this video, and something that I'm seeing come up in the Q&A, is the idea that this might be unstructured, or that it might be unplanned, or that it might be purposeless, when actually it's not. So this teacher, we don't see these pieces, we just see this little clip, but the clip has this sense of a classroom community where learners are making their own meaning together and the teacher is facilitating. So if the purpose of this exercise was for students to devise a collaborative definition of what odd and even numbers are, the students are working toward that, and the teacher is giving them the space to, and reining them in and rephrasing when she needs to. So her role is as listener and synthesizer, while students are the ones who are really making meaning in this space. I love that about this. And it's amazing to me that someone can do it with third graders.
All right, so at this point, I want to shift over to Malena. So now that we kind of teased out some of these comments and some things that we noticed from the video, we also are going to bring this back to evidence that we saw and also experience of our own engagement that Sarah talked us through in the writing into the day piece. So Malena.
All right, thank you so much, Stephanie. And First of all, again, it's so lovely we can't see you, which we didn't realize. And we didn't realize we wouldn't be able to speak with you. It just sometimes Zoom has these different settings. So we're so glad to see that you're out there based on our participants, the number of our participants. That's the thing we could see. And it's so wonderful to see all of these incredible answers coming through. So thank you, even though this engagement is perhaps a little bit stilted because of this particular format, you're engaging nonetheless, and we so appreciate that. Just as a reiteration, we've posted this link a couple of times to a Google Drive, and that Google Drive has that agenda, and that it also has what we've been using, this engagement heuristic. And some of you have been filling in or just listing on your own that column in the yellow. What did you notice in the video? And now together, I'm gonna work with the group to fill out the green columns. And then in a minute, we're gonna fill out the blue column. So the green columns are thinking about connecting this to a component of engagement that we've established in the research on engagement and learning. And then we're gonna connect this to some design principles. Now, oh, I see Suzanne do this excitedly. Okay, the reason I think Suzanne just did this, although I'm not certain, is she asked us a few times while we were planning this, she said, why aren't we providing a definition of engagement? And now this is really interesting to me because it relates to some of the comments that we read in the Q&A. Tani said, what's the purpose of the classroom exercise? Did the teacher accomplish their goals? And I thought this was really interesting. Now, sometimes we walk away from a lesson thinking the goal is that the children know what even and odd numbers are, right? And I'm gonna shift from saying children to saying learners because we wanna now start making this a little bit more broad, okay? So do the learners know, what did we want the learners to know at the end? So we want them to have memorized the definition of even or odd. I don't think that is this teacher's primary goal. I think that Deborah Ball, who's the teacher in this, was interested in having students engage deeply with mathematical debate, with mathematical discussion, with big ideas about numbers and how we categorize them. And that's really, and I think she felt that walking away from that classroom, those students would have a deeper understanding of even and odd than had she started out with a definition of even and odd, that they were working towards it, constructing it on their own. We've tried to do something parallel here, where we're having you try to engage with ideas about engagement, and then hopefully you walk away with some deeper understanding attached to some definitions of what engagement is. Now, we also know that if we just came away with some ideas about what the teacher did, you may or may not be able to connect that to what you're doing in your classroom. And this is a problem that we have in learning that we talk a lot about called transfer. I can learn something in one context, but I may or may not be able to transfer it to a new context. But we also know there's some things that help us do that kind of transfer. And one of them is if we can try to extrapolate from a specific example and understand what it means in terms of a broader principle, and then apply it to our specific context and practice that over and over and over again. So that's what we're going to do now. What I'd like folks to do, and Natalie, I know I gave you some slides. I think I'm going to skip over the slides for now and just have folks look at that third piece on the Google Drive, which is titled Engagement Construct Table and Bibliography. Okay, so if you can open that up, you don't need to write anything in it right now. So you don't need to download it at the moment. And thank you, Natalie. She's just put the link in the Google Drive again. Ooh, I clicked on the wrong thing. So now I've lost my notes. Okay, they're back. Okay, so what I wanted to see real fast is how long we have to do this discussion. Oh, perfect. All right. So what I did, what the group of us have done. So we went out and we looked at not all of, but a lot of the research on engagement. And here's what you find. There's not a simple definition of engagement, but probably like a lot of the complex concepts that you all deal with in your disciplines, the topic of engagement really seems to be made up of lots of different interrelated components. These components tend to be put into some big buckets. Now, several decades ago, when people studied ideas of engagement, they tend to focus on behaviors. So if the teacher asks a question and waits 5 seconds before she starts calling on students, then we might see 5 hands raised. But we notice when the teacher waits 10 seconds, there are 20 hands raised. And this is sort of a process product kind of approach to thinking about behavior. Here's the problem with that. We don't really know why those kids are raising their hands after 5 seconds or not, or after 10 seconds or not. Is it because they needed that time cognitively to engage with the problem? Is it because socially they looked around and after 5 seconds saw that more of their peers were raising their hands, so they felt emboldened? Is it because emotionally they were feeling a little bit shy and nervous about their answer, but as they practiced it in their head over the 10 seconds, they were able to then feel good about raising their hand? So when the field has done research on engagement, they have sort of shifted from thinking about those behaviors in the research to focusing in on cognition and affect or emotion. And we put those in one big bucket. You'll see that in the blue along the left side of that engagement construct. And I put them together, cognitive and affective, because they're really tied together. It's really hard to tease them apart a lot of the time. And then sociocultural. Okay, so I want to talk about some of these, but I want to talk about them in connection with the amazing things that you all saw. Okay, so let's go. I want to go back to the list that you generated with Stephanie during this amazing conversation. And also, Stephanie's a dancer. And so it doesn't, and as in addition to being a teacher, and it doesn't surprise me because it's amazing to see just how improvisational she's able to be in that moment, right? She's getting all of these Q&As and she's able to synthesize them and think about them and respond to them. And that is the skill of an expert teacher who's able to be improvisational, right? And that's certainly one of the keys to being able to do this work well, because we have to be responsive to our students in the moment in the ways that we saw Deborah Ball doing that and the ways in which we saw Stephanie doing that. All right, so let's take one of the first things I read in the Q&A and Stephanie mentioned. Someone said the students are really interested in the discussion. Okay, interest really, really matters when it comes to engagement. And the research has done this nice work for us of sort of categorizing a few different kinds of interest. I'm going to connect interest here. So if you look on the heuristic, sorry, I'm going to close out the chat because I get really easily distracted. But I'm going to ask my fellow panelists if there's something I should be attending to in the chat, if you would just shout it out so that I know. And same with the Q&A. Thank you. All right, so if you look over at interest, a good definition that what we've done in this table, you'll see is that there's sort of definitions of these specific terms, these constructs. And then if they're in quotations, it means that citation that's next to them, that's where it comes from. If you click on the other sheet in this Excel document, that's the bibliography where we have all of those things. So don't worry about the whole bibliography now, just to know that's where those quotations are coming from. So interest has been defined as this cognitive and affective motivational variable that develops through 4 phases. The first phase is this triggering of situational interest. All right, so we've got a situation. I'm not necessarily interested in even and odd numbers right now, but this question that Sean has raised is pretty interesting to me. I'm interested in the situation. That can then lead to this maintained situational interest. Okay, it's not just that I got triggered, then I'm interested. Now, in a more sort of long-term way, I'm pretty interested. That can lead to a broader interest, not just in the situation, but now an emerging individual interest. I'm sort of interested in numbers and even and odds, moving on to a deep, long-term kind of interest. Isn't this what we want to do all the time with our students? We don't introduce concepts that we think don't have meaning to them, but we have to do some work to develop that interest over time. So what we observed in the video is that they were interested in this situation. So how do we move from being interested in the situation to having this broader, more sustained individual interest in something? This helps us connect to a design principle. And I'm actually going to move over to this design principle. We tried to do some aligning of these constructs and the design principles, but what's important to know is that most of these design principles connect to a lot of these different constructs, these components that are part of engagement. And one of the ways in which we could help develop this interest over time is through scaffolding. So we actually have that under the related design principle with competence. And you can think about ways, how do I, as the instructor, start out with a really interesting situation for my students, and then make it so it builds into something that's not just an interesting question, but now it's something broader that I see as related to my life. I see as related to something bigger, okay? Let's take another one, because I spent a lot of time on interest. I love that a lot of people talked about how the students were learning from one another and engaging with one another. So let's move away from the affective and cognitive, and we see now the sociocultural kind of bucket of different ideas. One of the things that we know about that's really important with students for them to be engaged is they feel related. And related can mean related to the material, but just as much related to one another. So these students, someone was talking about how they're really polite with one another. They respected one another. They were curious about one another, what one another had to say. They also seem to really know and trust that the teacher wasn't going to tell them to get down from the board, right? Or to not pick up that stick to sort of talk about the number line and the different things that they saw and the numbers and the circles. They seem to have a really strong rapport, and that relates to this sort of relatedness, which is also connected to this notion of not feeling alienated. I think this is particularly important because we know during COVID in particular, people are feeling generally socially quite alienated. And depending on how we're thinking about structuring our classrooms, students can feel really alienated from one another, from the material, from the instructor. And so I think this is something where we may have to do some hard work now to think about how do we consider how we don't have our students feel alienated and feel connected, even in online spaces that might feel really different than a classroom where we all get to see each other. You'll see the last column, we've started of the construct table. We have started providing some examples of ways from our classrooms that we just started, and we'd love you to continue, of examples of these design principles in action. And so, for example, Stephanie shared that she had with us that she does drop-in hours where she just opens herself up, you know, like she was opening her door, but people can come and chat with her, right? The very last thing I want to talk about, and then we're going to give you all an opportunity to start filling this out, is this authenticity. And I'd say, as someone who works in higher ed and someone who's worked in K through 12 schools, authenticity is one of the things that feels most important to me, and that is so often, unfortunately, especially in lower level classes, lacking. So when Deborah Ball now lectures, she's the dean of the Michigan Education School right now, not surprising seeing what a master teacher she was in that video. When she lectures about teaching mathematics, she says, I don't want my students to memorize procedures. I don't care about math facts. When I think about what mathematics is learning how to debate and argue about numbers, is understanding deep concepts about mathematics and numbers, et cetera. You can tell I'm not a mathematician. What we'd like you to do is reflect on what's really authentic. What is it that scholars in your discipline do? And how do I ensure that the things I'm doing in my classroom that are often, ding, 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 this is what's great and exciting, more connected, more interesting, therefore more motivating, have more value for the students? How can I do those things in my classes? And we cannot say that it's not appropriate for a freshman seminar, right, or a freshman lecture, when we just saw third graders debating mathematical concepts, right? We know that they're capable of doing these things. So for the next 5 minutes, what I'd like you to do is take some of these, and I know we didn't have a chance to go over all of them with just an introduction, but thinking about something you or one of our peers in this, peer participants in this group noticed, how we've maybe connected it to one of these components of engagement that comes from the research, or a design principle. So something broad. So we took that specific, we broadened it out. Now I want you to think about, okay, here's a way I could do this in my class. That was something related to even and odd numbers. What can I do in one of my classes that would maybe parallel and have some of the effects of motivation, value, relatedness, right? We didn't talk about metacognition or other learning strategies, but that's a part of that too, right? What's something I could do in my classroom that might parallel some of the things we saw in those classrooms? But rather than just trying to sort of copy it out from the video, really think about what principle or construct does it connect to, and then how can I apply that in my classroom in an authentic way? So we'll take 5 minutes to do that, and then we're going to shift over to Robin. So we'll put on our mutes, we'll all do a little bit of quiet work, and then we'll come back together. Okay, I sort of lied. I'm not giving you a full 5 minutes because I want to make sure we have a little bit of time to share ideas. So I'm giving you 30 more seconds to jot down your last ideas. And then if you raise your hand, and you can see that hand raise on the bottom of the screen, I'll call on you and you can share your ideas with the whole group. So 30 more seconds. All right. Who's brave and has an idea for how they could take one of these design principles or one of these components of engagement and apply it in their own class? So raise your hand, or I've got, and we can unmute you. I didn't realize we could do this. We can unmute you and then you can share with the whole group. Or you can just put it in the Q&A and I'll read it aloud to the group. All right, I don't see a lot of hands. I don't know, I'm thinking of calling on some of these amazing people I see here. Anyone have any ideas of how they could take some of these principles? Oh, we got a hand. I don't see it.
Oh, but there's something in the chat.
Oh, great. Okay.
A couple of things.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, these are great. Oh, and now I'm seeing some hands too. Okay, you're all, see, wait time. I should have gone back to the behaviorist models of engagement. All right. So I'm gonna, because everyone can see the Q&A, I'm gonna leave that and let's take some of the people with the hands, but everyone should look at the Q&A because there's some really good ideas there. So I see Michael, okay, talking permitted, you're allowed to speak. Michael, you wanna share your ideas?
Yes, I think it would be very useful to use the value part of that table and project into the future what students' practice will be like. I think the only part of what their practice will be like, which is direct social work practice. And if they're going to do generalist types of social work practice or remain in the field for a while, they're going to begin to use a type of practice that is more macro, it focused on changing and humanizing organizations and communities, or constructing, evaluating, and advocating for policy. So I think that was called instrumental values.
Michael, that's brilliant. So I heard you do a lot of things that are captured on this table and in the literature. Once you reflected authentically about the field and what is it that we want practitioners in the field to be able to do in the future? And then how do I start that process in my classroom in authentic ways? But you also recognize that that needs to be scaffolded. So how do I begin that kind of authentic work and have students also recognize the relatedness? This is what you're going to be asked to do, how you're going to relate to the field, and how you're going to be able to do that starting out in the class, seeing how it's going to apply later. Brilliant. There was another hand up I saw before. Oh, did they put their hand down? Thank you so much, Michael. So, oh, Teresa. Natalie, can you permit Teresa to speak? Teresa, it looks like you're still muted. Can you unmute yourself now? I think you should be able to and share.
I think I did. Okay. So I think about collaboration, and I was just thinking about in a population health promotion course, for example, to take the concepts of a community program model, perhaps, and working together, have it to identify a problem and then coming together and putting the concepts of that model together and how you might apply it to a specific problem within an intricate population or with a particular population, and pulling those ideas through collaboration from individuals from different areas of practice.
Teresa, I think that's brilliant. And again, if we think about this as a design principle, this is a design principle of problem-based learning. And what do we do in problem-based learning? It is a lot of work for the instructor. And as Stephanie and Sarah suggested earlier, it's sometimes behind the scenes work. But let's say this, going back to Tawny's concern, does the instructor know where she wants to get by the end of this class? You just talked about a problem. As instructors, we need to think about complex problems that if students are going to solve them, if our learners are going to solve those problems, are going to require these different types of knowledge. So rather than saying, I want my students to know these things, and I'm going to start the class by telling them these things and having them apply them, which is a typical model, I'm going to introduce a really complex and authentic problem. And the only way my students are going to be able to solve that problem is if they're able to conscript these forms of knowledge, right? Which is what we do in our everyday authentic practices. And then I'm going to have some sort of assessment. I could still have the same basic assessment, right? It might look like a pretty traditional test, but the problem to help them get to that knowledge looked really different. It was problem-based rather than just providing the knowledge. Or I somehow use some other kind of assessment to meaningfully assess that knowledge. These are brilliant. And I wish we had the time to engage with more of these ideas, but I want to now pass it on to Robin, who's going to do some reflection exercises with us. So thank you so much for all of your great thinking right now and during this conversation.
All right, thank you. So I wanted to sort of come back around. So one of the things that we started with, right, was a reflection of what you had felt engaged with previously in your experiences, right? It didn't have to be a classroom. It could have been a hobby that you learned. And so what we wanted to do is reflect again, sort of on what we've done here and your level of engagement that you felt through this. Now, I will tell you, if it had been a discussion session where we could have had sort of everybody coming in and out, it would have been a slightly different situation. But when we started the process of making this work, right, the six of us had sat down and we started talking. We were like, well, a panel sounds great, but really what we want to do is we want to get the people engaged. We want you to do some stuff. And so what I'd like you to do is to sort of take a minute and see if you can really come up with the ideas that we put forth in this experience within this last hour of that tie back to those engagement constructs or into the design principles as well. And if you can go ahead and post those in the Q&A or if you have information. So just sort of think about what we've implemented here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those as they come up, but then I'll also talk about ones that we didn't do in this situation as well that might be helpful for later. So just take 1 minute. If you have something that you feel like worked here for engagement and got you engaged in here, I'll stop talking for a minute now. I'm very bad about silence. All right. So does anybody want to jump in, or I can start with one just to sort of get the ball rolling, maybe. So just in the Q&A, if you have some things, I'll read them as best I can, sort of like Stephanie did. So a couple of the things that had come up through the discussion with Milena, a lot of things about how to get people involved in the online system, right? And that was something that we wanted to try and show here, right? Was that you can, even with a group of people who, oddly enough, we can't see, right? That's sort of the go-to, is that you really are frustrated seeing the black screens of everybody. We don't even have a black screen of you. I'm just looking at my other panelists. So there's ways to engage people even if you can't see them, right? And sort of some of the ways that we've been talking about. So yeah, so engaging more with prompts, with making them come up with ideas, right? Having them respond, even if it's not verbally, having them respond to the situation by chat, right? Or some sort of drive. The idea of polling students. So that's something we didn't do here, right? We had talked about it. How many polls should we put in? See how people are doing stuff? Absolutely. Those are all going to be things that will garner interest, right? It'll make students feel a little bit more self-regulated in how they are being able to sort of associate to the stuff that we're looking at. the time to effectively provide enough information and learning experiences. I think that's going to be a challenge regardless, right? I think we all as professors and instructors have these grand ideas of what we could do in a classroom if we had 2 to 3 hours every class session, right? And that's always a challenge of making sure that things are going to be a little bit more engaging for the student or interesting to the student. Some of the other stuff, so Elizabeth said that she really liked the beginning of the workshop where we had that prompt. The whole idea of using that writing into the day. I'm an engineering faculty member. It's not something I normally think to do, right? And having been in this discussion, it's something that that I've come to realize will actually help tailor the attention of my students, right? That whatever topic I'm coming into, right? We sort of got you thinking about engagement prior to this. Some other things that we tried to do here. So one in particular for a design a design principle was the scaffolding, right? We started out with, we don't know what your sense of engagement is, right? And so we sort of started out with, hey, what do you think it is? Here's an example of somebody else who is doing it without a definition. And then, okay, here are some prompts or some definitions that you could probably use and implement into your own experiences. And so that idea of scaffolding the information is one that we sort of hit hard on. And then some of the things that we didn't get to, right? So with the number of people who had registered for this, it just didn't make sense to do breakout rooms. A lot of people have said in the Q&A that team-based learning, doing breakout rooms, having that interaction between people, right? That garners interest. It also garners that sociocultural aspect where you're trying to work with other people. We didn't get to do that here today, but that is absolutely something that we had considered as one of the key components for how to get people engaged. And then I also there's the idea of how do you get students engaged beyond discussion boards, right? So it's not always just about writing a sentence. How do you do other things with them to make them more interactive? And then the last thing that I'll sort of touch on before we open it up for questions is this idea of authenticity, right? That Milena had brought up, that Stephanie had brought up significantly. The idea that students want to know how this is going to work, right? That they want to see where the information that you're giving them is going to be applied. And, we've shown you a couple of examples. We had the list in the engagement construct table that has a couple of examples. We're happy to give other ideas as well, as if you have those as questions in the session Q&A area. But that's the idea, is that you have to get the students involved. There's a level of engagement that you need to get, and that you get that through a lot of these different design constructs and also the concepts that we've sort of presented here today. So with that, I will hand it back over to Suzanne.
Can I throw one thing in there? I wanted.
Sorry. Yes.
I saw it. No, sorry. I was trying to jump in on the tail end there, and I saw lots of folks mention this. I saw some things on, like you said, Robin, on the discussion board and having students engage with each other. Jessica Haynes was mentioning some comments too. So often we ask folks to write and to type responses too.
Right.
And,
sorry.
No, that's fine. So one thing that I see folks in the Q&A also asking was, well, this conversation is lacking. We could do breakout rooms, but what else? So another thing I think is great is Flipgrid, those kinds of platforms where you're not asking students to give back the definition, but you can utilize those things in labs, in movement spaces, in unique areas of the classroom, whether they're in a traditional classroom or not, to have students show and then have your other students in your class see what the other students are showing. So I saw several comments on that. So I wanted to mention that as a really useful way to have students show verbally even as well as their understandings.
And that brings up another point real quick to end this. We also did a bunch of different techniques through this, right? You had the writing into the session. You also had a video, right? So some technological use. We also had sort of the lecture style component, but then also the reflective component. So making sure that you incorporate all those sorts of ideas will truly help students to stay interested and engaged in their learning experience.
Robin, can I add one more related?
Absolutely.
To build off of what everyone's been saying already, thinking about those alternatives to discussion boards, had we not been concerned about time and the number of participants, we had talked about using things like Padlet or Jamboard or Stormboard. And what those are essentially online whiteboards where people can go together, all of you using the same link, and you could sort of do a real-time reflection, but see one another. So you're getting that sort of motivational interest. Oh, I'm interested in what these other people are saying. Oh, and you're getting this relatedness, even though we can't see each other in one another's faces, we can see one another's words. So those are listed in the on some of the documents as well that we listed, but that's another good alternative to just that sort of static discussion board. And it's a lot like a Google Doc, but it looks like a whiteboard. Ooh, and VoiceThread, that Sarah just mentioned, which is such a great tool. And I actually think I saw someone mention that in the Q&A as well.
All right, so we still have a few more minutes left in our time today to answer some questions that might come from the audience. And those can come in through the Q&A, and Natalie can unmute you and you can ask that question in this safe learning space that we've created for you today. Or of course you can type those questions in and we can respond to them. If you have a particular person that you want to hear from, you could call them by name and we'll do our best to get those answers for you.
A couple of questions in the chat a little bit earlier. So there's a question about teamwork. So student teamwork is one of the best strategies, but how do we foster it remotely? This is a big question.
I think one thing that's really important for us to remember is that even if our class is not synchronous, we can ask students to find time to meet in small groups synchronously, right? So they can be connected to one another in those small groups. They can schedule that on their own time. They have the tools through WVU to do it through Zoom or Teams or Collaborate, even if our class is asynchronous. So I think that's important to remember as well for teamwork.
Even when I teach asynchronous courses, I ask students to meet with me in small group conferences. And that's one way to create a feeling of teamwork together.
There was a question earlier, but now I can't find it. And I think it was from Marina Galvez, and it was about grades and students sort of being motivated by grades. Marina, I don't know if you're still here and if you want to ask your question. I see Ruchi's hand raised.
Yeah, so I think it was those students. Oh, sorry, Marina, there she is. Head.
Yeah, okay, so I'm just going to let you talk, and then Ruchi, I'll get to you after that, okay? Okay, so yeah, there you go.
So the question was, I really enjoy how the students in the video were discussing where they were focused on learning and find out the definition of even and odd numbers, right? Nobody was asking, like, but what is going to be in the exam? So I feel that one of the biggest challenge I can face is that sometimes I feel the students is asking how many points this is going to give me, right? It's like a buying and selling rather than focusing on how much they are learning with this critical thinking experience. So I don't know if anybody has any suggestion to kind of do a mind shift from points or exam driven towards learning driven. Thank you.
In my perfect world, there wouldn't be grades. So I'll preface with that. But one thing that we do in the undergraduate writing program is that we don't grade until the end. So students have the opportunity to revise all the way through the entire semester, any writing that they do. And of course, I give them feedback, right? Our instructors give students substantial feedback to help them do those revisions, but they're not expected to get a grade on their writing until the end of the semester when they can show substantial revision. The other thing that you might think about is grading reflections on learning rather than grading the task, right? So that values process over the product. So you might have students do a task, but it's the reflection that they get or earn points for.
I think there's a great thing, Sarah. And another thing I would say too is I try to think of two different activities or behaviors here. When I look at a syllabus, I say, what is my syllabus showing me that's important? So I always reflect on that and say, okay, if my student gets this, they're going to see that these things are important, or read that those things are important to me. So the other thing I would say is, in lieu of, and also kind of with that, is thinking about standards-based grading. So it's looking at, or objective. I'm looking at, my students are going to master these things, instead of ABC, did they master it and to what extent? So those are kind of two things I like to do.
I'll add one thing really quickly, which is just, if you come up with a great problem or a great project that is intrinsically motivating, that can sometimes trump the extrinsic motivation of the grade. So I recognize I'm still interested in that grade, but gosh, this is such a cool project. I'm really loving it. So that sort of makes that why I'm engaged with it, rather than just doing it for the grade. And that shifts the kind of learning that people do for that task as well.
I'm going to give Ruchi permission to talk so she can ask her question. Okay, so
Thanks, Natalie.
you're welcome.
So I really loved the video, and thanks to everyone. This was very informative. Thank you so much. I really loved the video. One thing, because of my personality, I also try to make the class very interactive, but it backfired with a few students in one class. Some of the students did not like my asking them to engage in the class and not giving a direct answer for a while until, everyone discussed and gave suggestions. And then much later, I would actually say what the correct answer would be. I would let everyone speak as much as they could. So basically, they were discussing and engaging. And towards the end of the semester, a couple of students said that they found that very confusing, and that was really very disruptive for them, that I would not give an answer, a correct answer, when they answered something. Because I would just say, well, okay, yes, great. Let's hear from others. And, much later I would give the answer. So that did not go down well with a few students. So what should we do?
I certainly feel your pain in that, because I think that's one thing that starts at such a young age for many of our learners and many of our students, even through the P12 experience. When they come to us after, they've been in some instances taught that there's one answer and it's in the back of the book, and that's the one that you want, right? And so they're just kind of trained more or less that I just want to give you what you want to hear. And when they get into a situation that's uncomfortable with the learning and they have to push themselves, I certainly see that, and I know many of us in this call see it as well. So I think one of the things is being very upfront and saying, we are going to be grappling with these things, and grappling with issues is just as important as having an answer immediately. So what do my other panelists think on that? Because I know that's a common thing, and it's such a cultural shift to go from what answer do you want to what answer can we get at together?
So I'll touch on that real quick. Coming from engineering, that is the mentality regardless, right? That I need the right answer, and if I don't get the right answer, I don't get 100%, which then doesn't necessarily help in all classes, right? Like the design sort of idea of engineering is lost on that. And so I think that you're doing the right thing, right? I think that you challenge it for the students, and instead, and potentially then explain that at the beginning. Look, yes, I have an answer. No, I'm not going to give it to you, right? You can work toward that, and the process of working toward that is going to help you get the next answer on a problem that has similar concepts behind it, right? Or something like that is how I've structured that. But yeah.
All right. I'd like to thank everybody for participating today. We're getting close to the end of our time together, and I wanted to draw attention to the fact that Melissa Latimer was able to join us, and she's here with us. And if you'd just like to unmute yourself and say hello and give some final thoughts before we close out today.
Thank you, Julie Black, for getting me in. I'm not sure exactly what she did, but I appreciate it. Thanks to the panelists for the pieces that I caught. It was very good, and I really appreciate it. Natalie, thank you for pushing for having this panel today. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't somehow tie this back to promotion and tenure annual reviews, digital measures in some way. So that's what I'm going to do. You know, so you've done all this work and you've engaged your class in all these multitude of ways, and you can see the transformations in your students, and you know that your SEIs are going to reflect it. So at the end of the year, you just drop that syllabus in and you just let those ESEIs move in. What else should you be doing to show what it is you're doing in the classroom so that your colleagues understand what you're doing? And how do you actually show that what you're doing is connected to the impact and the change?
I would say that narrative is the best option to start, right? So my narrative grew exponentially when it was required because I could start, and particularly with the COVID switch, right? All of the new ideas of how to engage, of how to get the point across, right? They were talking about things like Jamboard and Padlet. I used something called Miro. Those kinds of things are all making you a better instructor, right? And they should absolutely be acknowledged as you write up your document or put in that supporting information of how you use stuff.
And I feel like as those shifts are happening, as Robin's talking about, also documenting and providing evidence how your students' understanding has deepened and grown as a result of your shift in instructional strategies.
So how do you do that? Can you
It's a
give me
good question. I would, for example, think about evidence I collected in the classroom, whether it's in a kind of assessment, whether it's a kind of discussion board, maybe it's a video of class, those kinds of things to say, well, this is what I did before, and these are kind of like the standard issues I got. And then after I implemented the strategy, here's the evidence of learning that I have after that implementation.
All of this takes really careful scaffolding, and it's for so much of this, it's about process over product. So I'm really careful about documenting my process and what that looks like, and showing how maybe an assignment changes over time and what student responses look like over time.
And I'll throw one more thing in there, and the why. Why did you make that choice? Because it was intentional.
I know that we are required or expected to share our syllabi. And one thing, if we find that we have a hard time getting all of this into just exposition and our narrative, you can also do what I do with my teacher education students is I have them create lesson plans and then use sticky notes to annotate. Why would you start with that kind of hook? Why would you use those materials? Why would you have those questions? And we can annotate our syllabi to help show that kind of process that Stephanie and Sarah is talking about. Why do you have these as your objectives? Where do we see the evidence of those objectives being worked through in the readings or in the assignments? So annotating your syllabi for your review committees might also be a way of supplementing those narratives.
Very good discussion. And on that note, I think we'll have to end for the day. We're about a minute over. So thank you again for attending. And we hope to have another session like this in coming months. So please stay tuned for an announcement on what's next to come.